I want to take you back to October of 2008. If you remember, the economy was crashing, the stock market was about to lose 60% of its value. I worked at Texas Instruments at the time, and Texas Instruments has just announced that to cut costs, they're going to lay off about 1,400 people, except they didn't say who. So I didn't know if I was going to be one of them. But on top of all of that, what was on the top of my mind was that I had to come up with a topic for my PhD dissertation. And you know something, if you're working on a PhD, you know that a good dissertation is a done dissertation. And so I was aiming pretty low, but my mentor, Cordy, he was trying to get more out of me. And I kept coming up with topics for my PhD dissertation, and he kept shooting them down. And this was going on for a while, and I got pretty annoyed with him. And at some point, he asked me a pivotal question. He asked me, what pisses you off? And well, I wanted to say, you, because I'm trying to come up with topics, and you won't let me. But instead, the words that came out of my mouth were, why are people so much more creative when they work in startups than when they work in large, mature companies? That was quite on the other side of the line. And then he said, I think we have a topic. So for the next 2 years, I researched the answer to exactly that question. Why are people so much more creative when they work in startups than in mature companies? Some of you work for startups. Some of you work for very large companies. You know what I'm talking about, but I couldn't put my hands on a very specific answer. I was done writing chapters 1, 2, and 3, submitted them. The committee approved it. I went on to chapter 4, the results, submitted it. The committee approved it. I was done with chapter 5. And I called Cordy, my mentor, on Sunday night, and I told him that I'm done writing it. And he said, send it to me, email it to me. And I said, well, give me another week just to, clean it up, read it again a few times. And he said, fine. But unfortunately, Cody went to sleep Monday night and did not wake up Tuesday morning. So I dedicated the research to him. And I did graduate, and that's a picture from my graduation. This is my younger daughter, Shira. Shira was 9 at the time. She's 19 in college now. And Shira had a friend over for a play date, and her friend asked her, Shira, so where did you come from? And Shira said, we just came back from my daddy's doctoral graduation ceremony. And her friend asked, oh, really? So your daddy's a doctor? And Shira thought about this for a second and said, yeah, but not the useful kind. So you may wonder, what is the answer to that question that led my entire dissertation? Why are people so much more creative when they work in startups than when they work in large, mature companies? And I found that I can narrow it down to one word: innovation culture. It's actually 2 words if you put the space in between, but I don't put the space, so it's 1 word. And then I had to define what innovation culture really is. And to me, innovation culture was this simple model. Everything in the green is positive. Everything in the red is negative. Everything on the left is vertical relationship between leaders and followers. Everything on the right is what happens within a team. And so if you're a leader and you provide autonomy, what you get is accountability. If you're a leader and what you provide is bureaucracy, what you get is CYA. If you're on the right side and you work within a team, your ability to hold constructive disagreement, where we can passionately disagree, but stay friends, and it's never personal or emotional or irrational, then we have a very strong team culture. But if we try and avoid it, or we have office politics, or we have the meeting before the meeting after the meeting, just not the meeting during the meeting, you know what I'm talking about? That's when you don't have constructive disagreement. And so in 2017, I decided to write the book, Culture Starts With You, Not Your Boss. And that was essentially the model in the core of that book. And this was what I was going to start taking to clients. And while the book was being edited, after I finished writing it, I went to a client, a potential client, and we sat down and we started talking about a culture of innovation where you have accountability and autonomy or freedom. And then you have the ability to hold, the ability and the desire to hold constructive disagreement. And in the first 20 minutes of this meeting, I realized that there's something else that's missing. Because none of those in the green will happen, because what was missing was trust. And that's, in 2017, was why I decided to start researching trust. Now, if somebody had asked you back in 2015, where would you see yourself 5 years from now, would this be what you would have answered? I'm going to guess the answer is no. Well, this is what the world looks like today. This is what a city council meeting looks like. This is a real city council meeting. This is what a school board looks like. This is what my class at the Southern Methodist University looks like. Yes, I'm the one in the top, second from the left. And this is what it looks like. This is what the world is today. And if somebody asked you 5 years ago, where do you see yourself 5 years from now? I'm willing to bet that this was not it. Well, President JFK had noticed something interesting in the Chinese language. He said that the Chinese use 2 brush strokes to write the word crisis. One of them, the one on the left, the orange one, is the one that represents danger. And the one on the right is the one that represents opportunity. So, what is the opportunity now that we're all working virtually? The opportunity is that during a crisis, your true leadership skills become very apparent. That's an opportunity. And the danger? Well, the danger is that during crisis, your true leadership skills become very apparent. Let's work on that. My name is Yoram Solomon. I'm the author of the Book of Trust. Today you can call me Barney. I have 3 disclaimers for you before I dive into the content. First of all is this is going to feel like drinking from the fire hose. If it feels like drinking from the fire hose, all I can ask is please drink responsibly. The second thing is what you're going to get is you're going to get a taste of what I typically do with organizations over an entire day. I'm about to finish building an online course that does the same. You're going to get a taste of it, and that taste is going to be 8 different habits that I'm going to give you. And the third thing is that I get distracted very easily. It is your job as much as it is mine to keep me on track. You keep me on track. I'm done in 60 minutes. We're going to do Q&A. By the way, I'm already online looking at your questions in the chat box, and I'm going to communicate with you. But we're going to be done in 60 minutes plus 15 minutes for Q&A. Deal? Give me a thumbs up. Excellent. In my work on researching trust, I came up with the 8 laws of trust. And the 8 laws of trust are that trust is continuous, it is contextual, it is relative, asymmetrical, transferable, reciprocal, dynamic, and two-sided. And if you want to remember it easily, just remember the acronym KKRATRDT. KKRATRDT. It's a little hard to pronounce. I think I've done something wrong there. Another thing I did was I did a survey, and in the survey, I surveyed, I believe, 363 people asking what is the most important quality for you in other people. First, I did that as an open-ended question, and then once I got the answers, I started narrowing it down to the top 5. Believe it or not, in number 5, with 3 out of 363, the number 1 quality, the most important quality for you in other people was good looks. I know, crazy. But number 1, with 61.2%, was trustworthiness. The number 1 quality that people look for when they look at you, whether you're their boss, their colleague, anything, is trustworthiness. I also developed a model of how trustworthiness takes place and takes shape. I even developed a mathematical model. And I know you're looking at that mathematical model and you go, is this guy for real? Actually, yes. This is a mathematical model that I developed. And I did put all of this in the Book of Trust. But I'll tell you one thing. This is far, far from being theoretical. Not only that it's far from being theoretical, but this is true even when we're not working virtually. Now, for the most of you, your companies have decided that you're going to be working virtually, and maybe you're never going to go back into an office, whether it's your choice or your company's choice, and maybe you are going to go back into an office. Either way, what I'm going to show you here today, those 8 habits that will make you a more trustworthy leader, especially in the virtual environment, is applicable even for the non-virtual environment. Let's start with number 1. And number 1 is increase the amount of time and intimacy. So the first thing that I need to explain to you is that trust changes. Trust changes over time. And between interactions, when you don't meet the other person, between the interactions, trust declines. And the reason is that it declines is because it's a self-defense mechanism. You didn't see the other person for maybe a month, maybe a year, maybe more than a year. Should you be trusting them as much as you did the last time you saw them? And the answer is no. It's a self-defense mechanism. However, during interactions, trust has the biggest impact. Now, what happens if we see each other more rarely, more infrequently now, simply because we're not at the same office as much as we did before? What happens to trust? Trust declines. Trust declines between interactions, and the fewer the interactions are, the more trust will decline. Time is important. Time builds trust. And so I want you to think about, I picked a technology example, and the technology example is around cars. You know, when I got my driver's license, which was when I was 17, so we're almost 40 years ago, when I got my driver's license, almost all cars had stick shift. Not very many of them were automatic. And the automatic transmission was kind of, scary. You didn't know if the car would get stuck in a certain gear and would not shift gears. And of course, the first ones were not as reliable and as effective as they are today. And so people were a little nervous around them. So you would be nervous driving an automatic car. But right now, 40 years later, it's like almost every car is automatic, full automatic. And so you trust them. And because time have passed with this technology, you started trusting that technology. Well, how about cruise control? I remember the first time having a car with cruise control. Weren't you worried that the car is going to get too close to the car in front of it and crash into it? I know I was. And it took a while. The more time we spent with that technology, the more we felt comfortable, the more we trusted it. The next was self-parking car, and I remember a friend of mine that had, I think it was a Lexus, that an LS 460 or something like that. I think it was one of the first cars that knew how to park itself, do parallel parking. When you did that, your foot was hovering right over the brake. This car is going to do something not exactly what I expected, and bam, you're slamming the brake because you don't trust it yet. The more time you spent with it, the more you trusted it. Autonomous cars. How many of you have been to an autonomous car and let that car actually drive you, not sitting behind the wheel? I'm talking about sitting in the back seat. How nervous is that? How nerve-wracking is that? How about autonomous flying car? Talk about autonomous flying cars. How about a plane? Airplanes have autopilots, right? But autopilot is one thing when it keeps the plane up in 32,000 feet, because if it stops working, you still have a pilot 32,000 feet down all the way to the ground. Did you know that many planes actually land themselves? They have an auto land feature installed in them, most of the new planes, if the visibility is not good enough. And the pilot doesn't even land the plane? I bet you didn't even know that. Well, how much are you going to trust an autonomous flying car like Uber is talking about in other companies? The more time you spend with the technology, the more you trust it. The more time you spend with another person, the more you trust them. During this, when you work virtual, I'm not even going to say during this pandemic. Of course, I just did. When you work with other people, the more time you spend with them, the more you can trust them. And guess what? the more they can trust you. That's time. But I said time and autonomy. Let's talk about autonomy. So I want you to read this out loud. I didn't make this up. I picked this up. Read this out loud. I bet you read, woman without her man is nothing. I hope I'm not losing the women here. But let me do one thing. Let me add 2 punctuation symbols. Okay? Same sentence, didn't change a single word. What does it sound like now? Woman. Without her, man is nothing. Completely different meaning. Hold that thought. You know, when I was a pilot, well, I still am a pilot. I remember when I was in Silicon Valley and I took friends. Every time friends would come over, I would take them. And one of the best places to show them from the air is either fly over wine country or fly over the Golden Gate Bridge. Believe it or not, you can fly over the Golden Gate Bridge. Don't even have to be in touch with air traffic controllers. So one day I'm taking friends, 3 friends in the plane, and I'm starting to taxi and all. And at some point I needed to talk to the tower. And one of my friends said, hey, are you about to use the pilot's voice? And I'm thinking, what pilot's voice? I don't have a pilot's voice. I just use my regular voice. I said, no, come on, do the pilot's voice. Do the pilot's voice. No idea what he's talking about. And I told everybody, listen, I'm about to talk to the tower, and when I talk to the tower, I need you to all be quiet, because if you know, they're going to hear everything that we talk about in the cockpit here. So be quiet. I'm about to talk to the tower. And they all give me the thumbs up, and then I said, Reed Hillview Tower, Cherokee 3016 Tango is ready to go 831 right. And that's when it hit me. I do have a pilot's voice. I do use a pilot's voice. But why? Why was I using the pilot's voice? Because I was trying to convey something beyond the words that I used. Because the words were pretty limited. All I had to say is, Reed Hillview Tower, Cherokee 3016 Tango is ready to go at runway 31 right. These are the words, but I needed to convey that I am in control here. I know what I'm doing. Do not mess with me. I'm ready to go, which means you're going to let me go. You're going to clear me for takeoff. And I needed to convey all of that, and I conveyed it through my tone of voice, because the words were the same. Let's play a game, okay? A little game. I know I can't see you. This is actually pre-recorded. Ha, not what you thought. This is pre-recorded, but act as if I'm there, right in front of you. Let's do this. Touch your forehead. Come on. Nobody's watching. Touch your forehead. Thank you. Touch your nose. Touch your chin. What'd you do? What did I say? I said touch your chin. This is the chin. This is the cheek. Why did you touch your cheek? You know why? Because a look is worth 1,000 words. This actually, the first time this statement was ever made was in 1906. This is the first time it was ever printed, and it's an ad, a commercial for a supply, what is it? An auto supply house. And this is the first time that somebody said this in words. You looked at me, you saw what I was doing, and that was an override on top of the words that I actually used. Even my tone of voice really did not convey anything, but I told you to touch your chin, but I showed you a cheek, and that's what you did, because a picture is worth 1,000 words. Peter Drucker said once that the most important thing in communication is to hear what isn't being said. What does it mean? How do you hear what isn't being said? Because you can hear it in the tone of voice, and you can see it in the body language or facial expressions. You may have heard of the 738-55 rule by Albert Mehrabian. That was research that he did in 1968 and 69. He published it in a book in 1971 called Silent Messages. And he's the one that coined this so misquoted rule that, 7% of our communications is conveyed through words. It's not true. He talked about feelings and liking. 7% of feeling is conveyed through words. 38% through the tone of voice and 55% through body language. We can even argue on how he got there, but here is something that I wanted to quote from him at the beginning of his book. He wrote, "When our words contradict the silent messages contained within them, others mistrust what they say." Winston Churchill was quoted to say, "I no longer listen to what people say, I just watch what they do. Behavior never lies." Why does this matter? Because trust is emotional. We base it on feelings, and feelings are conveyed so much less through the words that you use and so much more through the tone and body language. If any of you is old enough to know what's in this picture, or you've seen this picture, who is that? Walter Cronkite, right? And Walter Cronkite, in 1972, there was a poll that came up with Walter Cronkite is the most trusted man in America. Anybody has any idea what he's saying here in that video broadcast, in that TV broadcast? That's right. November 1963. And what he is announcing was that he just got the word from the hospital that President JFK, who was assassinated, was declared dead, was pronounced dead. He was emotional. He took off his glasses. You could see how emotional he was. And that was one of the reasons why he was named as the most trusted man in America. Because of how his body language, his tone of voice that was broken at that time, and the words that he said all worked together. Of course, today we're in a Zoom world or a Microsoft Teams world or anything else. And so today he would look something more like this. So, number one, if you want to be trusted while leading a virtual team, spend more time with them and try and have face-to-face interactions. Now, when I say face-to-face, okay, if you're working remotely, how do you do face-to-face? Guess what? Video conferencing. You may be wearing a mask when you're in public now. Can you see me, by the way? Can you see me with that? It's supposed to be camouflage. You're not supposed to see me. When you put the mask on, you can only see the eyes. So a real face-to-face in-person meeting right now with a mask on is not as good as a video conference call where you can actually see my face and hear my tone of voice that's not kind of filtered through the cloth. Number one, increase time and intimacy of interactions and the frequency of those interactions. Number two, that blew my mind. Did you know, you probably do, that there's software that can actually track employees and show you if they're sitting by their computer and if they're working and if they're productive and you get reports? I was shocked to find that there's something like that for college. My daughter one of my daughters was telling me that her exams are proctored. And I said, how exactly are they proctored if you're sitting up in your room taking your exam? And she said, no, they're using the camera. And there's a piece of software, this is one, there are others, that can actually monitor you. If you have to monitor your students because you can't trust them, if you have to monitor your employees, hold that thought. I'll finish that sentence soon. How many of you have kids? Raise your hand if you have kids. No, if you don't have kids, raise your hand if you know what kids look like. Okay, you know what kids look like. So when my older daughter, Maya, who's now 21 years old, almost finishing college, when she was a toddler, she was crawling and then she lifted herself up. And when she lifted herself up, she realized she could stand. And after she could stand, she said, what can I do with those legs here? Oh, I can walk. So she found that she can walk. And after she realized she can walk, the next thing she tried was that she started running. She started running. And the first time she ran, the first thing that happened to her was that she Fell. Exactly. She fell. And the first thing that she did when she fell was that no, she didn't. You thought I couldn't hear you. You said she cried. No, she didn't. What did she do? Got up and kept going. No, she didn't. You know what's the first thing that she did? First thing that she did was she turned around and she looked at me to see my expression. And every family has these two roles. One of them, not necessarily the wife, is the one that's going to go, and when you do that, guess what she's going to do? She's going to start crying because apparently something terrible had just happened. And there's a second person in the second role, not necessarily the man, who would go, get up, keep going. And that's when she's going to lift herself up and she's going to look at her knee and say, but there's something red here that's kind of dripping, but I don't know, I guess they don't think it's a big deal, so I'm going to get up and keep going. Trust is that way as well. Trust is reciprocal. And when you are trustworthy, I mean, that's the obvious part of that reciprocity. When you are when you're trustworthy, somebody else may trust you, but it works the other way around too. If you trust another person, if you show them that you trust them, they will behave in a trustworthy way because they don't want to feel that cognitive dissonance of my boss or somebody is trusting me and yet I behave in an untrustworthy way. You remember that I told you that the trustworthiness was number one quality in 61.2% of the time? Well, let me break it down for you. Here's our 61 or 61.2% of the time, and it's distributed. And if you look carefully, you can see something a little different here. If you focus on the red ones, this is what only in 5 out of the 6 types of people, trustworthiness was number one. Those types of people were your boss, your employee, your peer or colleague, a salesperson trying to sell you something, a government representative, and your spouse. In 1 out of those 6, trustworthiness was not the most important quality. When I asked leaders, employers, bosses, when I asked them what is the most important quality for you in your employees, number 1 with 47.5% was the willingness to work hard. Number 2, with 39%, was trustworthiness. Let me stretch this a little. When I asked employees about their boss, what's number 1, what's the most important quality for you in your boss, they said it was their trustworthiness. But number 2, and this is the only time when it reached number 2, with 20%, was their willingness of their boss to take risks. What kind of risk? On them. They wanted their bosses to be willing to take a risk on them. Autonomy and accountability are reciprocal as well. If you show me that you're accountable, then you're going to get the autonomy or the freedom from me. Do you want to have freedom? Do you want to have the autonomy to do your job the way you think it should be done? Yes. Well, this works the other way around too. If you give your employees, your followers, if you give them autonomy, they will behave in an accountable way. And if you give them bureaucracy and rules and policies, you know what you're going to get back? CYA. They're going to do everything to the letter and nothing beyond that because all they want to do is cover their behinds. Exactly. Teresa Amabile is a professor in Harvard, and she actually wrote something that I appreciated. I used a lot of her content when I did my research, my doctoral research, because she writes a lot about creativity. But she wrote something like, creativity thrives when managers let people decide how to climb mountains. They shouldn't give them the opportunity to choose which mountain to climb. Apply this to autonomy in your place. If you should not let your employees, the people who work for you, the people who work with you, you shouldn't let them decide what they're going to do. But you need to let them decide how to do it and not micromanage them and not get into the smallest of details. By the way, there are plenty of reasons why you should not be giving autonomy, right? Because, first of all, you can do it better, right? You can do it better. Why let them do it? It takes so long, so much time to explain. How about if I just do it myself? 3 is because they are not accountable. Well, guess what? If you don't give them autonomy, they're never going to be accountable. 4 is I can't trust them. Did you try? Do you know that you shouldn't? Either way, if you don't give your employees autonomy or freedom, not to decide what they do, but how they do it, it's not a scalable model. You're going to end up doing everything. You're going to have 4 people on your team, and they're going to do almost nothing because you don't trust them to do their part. Think about the reciprocity of trust. Be a clockmaker, not a time teller. That's one of the most powerful statements I ever read in a book called Built to Last. Be a clockmaker, not a time teller. Make sure your employees can do the job, not that you do the job instead. And finally, think of this as an investment. Now, I mentioned that I'm a pilot, and so I think this airport here is Zurich or something like this. I picked that picture. And when you're taxiing your airplane on the ground, what you're going to find is that it's very hard to orient yourself. You don't know where you are. And so what I did was I would talk to the tower, I would look at the map, but when I took off at about 3,000 feet, I look around to the left, right over the left wing, and there it is. Now I know what this airport is like. That's the power of the big picture. If you're a CEO, if you're a leader, if you're a manager, it is your ability to give the big picture to the people who work below you. And you need to draw this line, and that line is exactly where you want your employees to be autonomous. Everything below the line is them. You determine you give them the big picture. You tell them how what they do fit into the overall picture of what this team works on or what the company needs. You share the boundaries. We can't do this and we can do this. And it's not that you can't do this. It's we. We can't do certain things because there are boundaries to our company. I may be your boss. It doesn't mean that I have unlimited funding or resources or time or anything else. But within that, between that line, between that barbed wire that you're going to put that barbed wire, and the barbed wire is not to protect you or the company from the employees. It's to protect the employees from you. It's so that you will give them the autonomy to decide how to do the job. Everything in blue here needs to be their area, their zone of autonomy and accountability. How do you know if you can trust them? Ernest Hemingway say the best way to find out if you can trust someone is, to trust them. Of course, you don't just do that blindly. We have Reagan that helped us with saying trust but verify. So number 2, if you can't trust your employees to do their job, either it's because you don't give them the autonomy and therefore you don't get accountability, or you don't have trustworthy employees. Either one of those doesn't work. Start by trusting them, show them that you trust them, and see how they're going to earn that trust. Number 3, sensitivity is going up, so use more empathy. If you're familiar with the Maslow's hierarchy of needs, if you're not, I'll just tell you what it is. We have concerns at different levels. We may have physiological concerns, and that is we need food, we need air to breathe, we need water to drink. Otherwise, we're going to die. Above that, we need safety, we need shelter, we need to be protected from all kinds of dangerous animals that are coming to eat us. Above that, we need love and belonging. You know what? In safety, I would even bring in safety a salary. We need a solid salary. We need the job. We need to know that our job is there. I forgot this term now. We need to be loved. We need self-esteem. We need to look at the mirror and feel good about what we see. And we need self-actualization. We need to get to the point where we can actualize, we can reap all of our potential, but we're not all at the same level. You may be up there at self-actualization, going around saying, you know what, I deserve a better job. I need to do something more. I can do something more, but I may be running out of money. I don't know how I'm going to pay rent next month. And if that's the case, we're not in the same place. So what's empathy? Babies and cats have something in common. They both believe that the world revolves around them. Babies grow out of it. Cats, not so much. You can tell I'm not a cat person. Let's see, how many people do we lose when I say this? Okay. So what do we do as babies grow up? We teach them the golden rule. And the golden rule is do unto others what you would like them to do to you. How many of you like sushi? I love sushi. Wife hates it. So would it make sense for me to take my wife to a sushi restaurant on her birthday because that's what I'd like her to do on mine? Not so much. Then we say, put yourself in other people's shoes. Here's the deal. It's a great statement, but those shoes may not be my style. They're not my size. So putting myself in their shoes is not going to work. True empathy is your ability, and I would say, and desire, to see things from the other person's perspective as if I were them and not me. Not put myself in their shoes. See what things look like from their shoes, from their side, as if it was them. Let me ask you this question. What number do you see here? Come on. Write it down. Remember, I am on the chat. 6, okay. Some of you see 9. Okay, that's the answer I'm looking for. Kind of. It depends. It depends on what? It depends on the perspective. Two different people. Is one of them wrong? No. They're both right. They just see things from different perspectives. You know, one of my pet peeves is when somebody invites me to a meeting and they send me a meeting invite, and the meeting invite shows up just like this on my calendar. Meeting with Yoram. I am Yoram. I don't know who I'm meeting, not from this. I have to open it up and see who sent it to me and so on, just to know. But this is what it shows up on my calendar. You know why? Because the other person did not feel empathy. The other person did not try and see what that meeting invitation looks like from my direction. That's what empathy is. It's a very simple case. There's something else. There is a reporter by the name of Stephanie Ruhle. She's a reporter for CNBC, typically reports on financial issues, personal finance. And I watch her, and the thing is that whenever I see her report, I think of her really as an object, a reporter that delivers the news. An object, a thing, not a person. Until one day she was reporting and her husband took a small cell phone video and posted it on Twitter, and it looked something like this. And what you see in the front is you see Stephanie reporting financial news and so on, but when you look at the back, her son was sitting next to her. He wanted to be on TV, but he just got too tired, and he lays his head in her lap. And all of a sudden, Stephanie Ruhle stops being that object that reports the news, and she becomes a person. We're getting very sensitive right now. And it is your ability to see things from the other person's perspective. It is your ability to see the other person as a person, to understand that there are different levels of the hierarchy of needs, the Maslow's hierarchy of needs, that helps you become more trusted of them. And by the way, it gives you the ability to feel that you can trust them more. That was number 3. Number 4. Make information available, communicate what's necessary. And I'm kind of giving it all away in just the title. You know, when you don't share enough information, it reduces trust. You know how it is that you know that your boss or somebody else on the team or somebody outside of the team, another team, they have information, they just don't share it. Do you trust them as a result? Not so much. On the other hand, we have too much communication. We're sending communication. We're sending information to people who need it, people who don't need it. We send, the amount of information that we send is so huge that it's not productive either. So what do? Well, this is the standard topology, right? The leader is in the middle. And all communication must flow through the leader, and only the leader decides who gets information. You know why? Because this is how leaders stay in power. We control information. But that is not productive. That does not make you an effective leader. Definitely not if you're running a virtual team. So what do you do instead? How about this topology? How about if in the middle what we put is some kind of a depository? Whether it's OneDrive, whether it's anything else, we're going to put information in one place. Everybody, including the leader, are responsible to put information there and take information out. Yes, sometimes there is confidential information that you can't just put in there, but take out confidential information. Other than that, put information in an organized, available, accessible way to everyone. When somebody on the team or even outside of the team needs to access to information, the information is accessible to them. Communication needs to take place between people at will. Communicate what's necessary. You know, I used to have an employee that would send me weekly reports every week, which is why we called it weekly reports. But his reports were so long. His reports took me about an hour and a half to read. And those were minute details of everything that he's working on. And there was absolutely no way I'm going to remember all of that and maybe not even understand all of this. And the reason he did that was because he didn't know that I trust him. But that level of information was overwhelming. There's one more thing that the leader has to do, and that is to share the big picture. You give everyone the big picture. You make sure that the information is available and accessible, and you let everybody do their job. It's kind of back to autonomy. There are different tools where you can put information. I'm not going to say one is better than the other. What can you do about it? First of all, make information available. Make it easily accessible, and again, within restrictions such as confidentiality. Communicate what's necessary based on needs and interests. If you know that another person needs a piece of information, even if they didn't ask for it, just tell them, hey, I think I know what you're working on, and I was wondering if that piece of information would be interesting to you, because again, you don't want them to sift through a lot of information simply because it's available to them. Sometimes it's just because the other person is asking. Okay, another one of my pet peeves. Never ever use BCC. I don't know why you all came up with BCC. BCC is not a good idea. You know how it is that, think about this. I'm sending you an email. It's just to you. I'm giving you some pretty strong feedback on something you're doing wrong. But don't worry, it's just you and me. You're on the to field. There's nobody on CC. You can't tell if anybody is on BCC, but let's assume that there's not. And all of a sudden, your boss responds to that email, to you, and says something like, yeah, you shouldn't have done that. Or even if they say, I don't think that it's that big a deal. What do you think about me now? Can I be trusted? Would you trust me? Not so much. Because the fact that I put your boss on BCC, I did that intentionally such that you will not know. Don't use BCC. Final thing I want to talk about in the context of communication is that, communication starts with a message in my brain. Okay? That's the first step. A message starts in my brain, then it goes to my mouth. You know how it is that sometimes the words that came out of your mouth were not what started in your brain? And then it comes out of your mouth, and when it comes out of your mouth, it is, I went too far. It comes out of your mouth and reaches the other person's ear. But the thing is that there's noise and maybe just audible noise, and what they hear in their ears is not exactly what came out of my mouth. And then they have their prisms of perceptions and understandings and everything that they experience in their lives that translates what came through their ears into their brains. And the bottom line is that what ended up in their brain is not what started up in mine. That's communication, miscommunication. And I have one question about miscommunication. Whose fault was it? Not me. It was your fault, right? And here's what happens. What we tend to do is say, this was your fault. You didn't understand a single word that I said. But when I do that, I put you on the defense. Even if it's the other way around and you're trying to tell me something and I didn't understand, I'm going to go, it's your fault because you can't explain nothing. When you put the other person on the defense, they're not trying to cooperate with you. When you say, I didn't understand what you said, can you try it again? And, don't assume that I know all the details and just take me like I'm stupid, okay? When you say that, you don't put them on the defense. On the flip side, if I said something and you didn't understand or you understood something else, I can start with something like, that's not what I meant. Let me try again. Work with me here. Help me explain this. Once again, you don't put them on the defense. That's communications. Number 5, I told you there are 8 of them. Number 5, focus on shared values. And I said especially situational because there are 3 types of shared values. There are universal shared values like telling the truth. Would you ever trust somebody who doesn't tell you the truth? So do I need to tell you to stick to the truth to be trusted? I hope I don't. Then there are personal values, and those are, you have your values, I have mine. And if we don't have similar shared values, personal values, we may have a problem developing trust. But the one I want to focus on are structural. Structural shared values, I served in the military, and so, for example, if, in the military, shared values means a common enemy. And a common enemy is someone who is, shooting at you, trying to kill you. The fact that there is such a common enemy actually builds trust. But you're not in the military. You're not wearing uniforms and carrying a gun. Can you think of another shared enemy? Maybe a shared enemy that we have right now as you're watching this session? Yeah. We have a shared enemy. Shared enemies can be a budget, a mean boss, a tight schedule. All kinds of things can be shared enemies. Those shared enemies actually bond us and help us trust each other. So the more you elevate those shared values, the more you identify them, we're about to start a meeting and let's just agree. The schedule is tight, the budget is tight, and our boss hates us. Okay, we can establish this. You know what you've done in this meeting? You have just put everybody on your side. You're all on the same team, and you're going to be trusted by the others. You know what does the opposite effect? Internal competition. Once again, one word. No space, one word. Internal competition. Number 6, hold constructive disagreements. I remember once I went into an Einstein Brothers and there were 2 Israelis sitting by the window and they were arguing and they were starting to raise their voices and before you knew it, they started using their outside voices and people started moving away and created some kind of a demilitarized zone around them. And I was thinking to myself, I understand Hebrew. I understood everything that they said. And everybody in the restaurant thinks that this is personal and emotional and irrational, but it wasn't. They were really fighting, arguing over something professional. At no point in time did they stop being friends. And in my research, one thing that I found was that when I asked people about in teams, I asked them about their willingness, their ability to hold disagreement. Let's just call it disagreement. Well, some of them said it was unproductive. Some of them said that they don't feel comfortable. Some of them avoid it altogether. Let's avoid disagreement. On the other hand, you have people that say we can disagree, but it's not personal, or we can passionately disagree and remain friends. Well, you know something? If you take the first 3, uncomfortable, unproductive, avoid it at all cost. In a low trust environment, the percentage of people that feel that way is 10 times higher than the percentage of those who feel the same in a high trust environment. Be able to hold a constructive disagreement. The constructive disagreement is made of 3 parts. It's your willingness to be vulnerable with the other person. It's your willingness to ask stupid questions and suggest stupid ideas. It's your willingness to give direct, unfiltered feedback to another person, and it is the receptivity to that kind of feedback. You know what else I found in my research? I found that in high trust environment, you're 240% more likely to be more willing to be vulnerable. You're 106% more willing to provide feedback, real good, powerful feedback. And you're 76% more willing to be receptive to feedback. And let me tell you something about feedback. Positive feedback is when somebody points out something good that you do. Negative feedback, this is my definition. Negative feedback is somebody pointing out something bad that you did, okay? It's not that the feedback is negative because the feedback is no good. It's that the feedback points out something negative that you did. Positive feedback makes you feel better about yourself. Negative feedback makes you better. But you need to trust the other person to be able to do that. Okay, so what do we say? Here are the things that I want you to be able to say. This is constructive feedback. Learn how to say, I don't know. Learn how to say, I was wrong. Say, I was wrong. Say it with me. I was wrong. It's a little hard to say, isn't it? By the way, there is an advanced version of that, and that is, I was wrong and you were right. That's the advanced version. Say, this was my mistake. And I want you to mean what you're saying. So these are the things you should say. Let's talk about the things you should not say. Stop saying next time ask first. That's not freedom. That's not autonomy. Stop saying this is not how we do things around here, or this is how we do things around here. You're stifling people. Another pet peeve of mine is there is no such thing as a stupid question or a stupid idea. Yes, there are. 80% of my questions are stupid and 93.7% of my ideas are stupid. But if I'm not feeling comfortable in being vulnerable enough to share them, then we're not going to be as effective as a team. Let's agree to disagree. No! Don't agree to disagree. Disagree and argue things and bring things up, because only that's how you make progress. And finally, stop looking for whose fault it is. Now, oddly, I was using this long before Ruth Bader Ginsburg passed away, but that is a statement that is a quote that was also attributed to her. You can disagree without being disagreeable. So hold constructive disagreement. That's number 6. Number 7, less BS and be less self-centered. In my model of trustworthiness, positivity, which is how you affect every interaction, is made of 2 things: the level of BS and the level of self-centrism. So if I look at the level of BS, people who are non-BS are people who say exactly what they mean. They have good intentions. They use common sense. They get to the point. They're genuine in how they look and how they talk. They're very clear. They are informal and friendly. They use knowledge and not assumptions. They're unbiased. They keep an open mind. They can change their mind during a meeting. And they use humor and sarcasm in an appropriate way. BS people, they don't say what they mean. They bring bad intention, no common sense, beat around the bush. They do things just for others to see rather than because this is the right thing. They use a lot of symbols, metaphors, very formal, very unfriendly. They use assumptions instead of using data and real knowledge. They're biased, they're fixated, they bring an agenda to a meeting, and they use humor and sarcasm, but inappropriately. The second component is self-centrism. There was a study done in 2017 based on the World Values Survey, and they found that in 51 years, in 78 countries, there was a rise of 12% in our individualism practices and values. And individualism is really that we think that the world revolves around us. You may think, well, 12%, not that big a deal. 60 to 69% in English-speaking countries. 60 to 69%. We've becoming very self-centered. If you're not self-centered in your interaction, then you're empathetic to others. You don't put yourself in their shoes. You see things from their perspective. You understand that there are two sides to every story. You are transparent. You're visible. You let people know what you're doing. You can take punches and not be offended immediately and, take everything personally, become emotional and irrational. You offer, you give more than you take, more than you ask. You bring value. You look for win-win. How can I win and you win? How do we grow the pie? And you listen before you speak. Self-centered people, on the other hand, world revolves around me. What else? There is no other side to the story. There's my side and that's it. They are reserved. They don't share much. They're oversensitive and get offended very easily. They ask more than they offer. They drain value from the meeting instead of bringing value. For them, everything is a zero-sum game. For me to win, you must lose. And they speak more than they listen. So if there's one thing that I want to make sure that you do, is that you remove one bad thing that you do before you try and add one good thing. And I know this kind of sounds like it's tangential to everything I talked about, but if you can identify one thing, whether it's BS that you bring into a meeting, whether it's being self-centered, and I gave you that list and you have access to the slides, we respond 3 times stronger to negative experiences than to positive experience. This is why we're 3 times more likely to post a negative review if we had a negative experience than to post a positive review if we had a positive experience. Bad is much stronger than good. Some would say it's 3. There was actually a critical positivity ratio that puts it at 2.9013, that we respond stronger to negative than to positive. There was a lot of research done on that. Eliminate one bad thing. Okay, let me summarize. Leading virtual team effectively and productively. I promised you 8 things, and the first one is increase the time and intimacy of an interaction. Meet more often, meet face-to-face, even if it's video conferencing, let them see you. You build trust that way. Give autonomy. Give people the freedom to decide how they do their job. Don't let them decide which job to do. Number 3, sensitivity is going up. Use more empathy. See things from the other person's perspective as if you were them and not you. Number 4, make information available. Communicate what's necessary. And I should add, own your side of miscommunications. Number 5, focus on shared values. Find especially the situational shared values. Bring up the common enemy that you have with the other members of the team. Number 6, hold constructive disagreement. Know how to do that with vulnerability, with feedback, unfiltered feedback and receptivity. And number 7, less BS and self-centered. As I promised you, 8. Wait. That was 7. Let's bring number 8. Number 8, think about the future after this. One day I was facilitating a strategy development session. A one-day session started at 8 a.m., was going to be done at 4 p.m. It was a hot day in Texas. And I asked people who participated, I had about 16 people, and I asked them, what does the word strategy even mean to you? What does the word strategy mean? Nobody could define strategy to save their lives. So then I thought of an analogy and I said, okay, I have something. Raise your hand if you parked your car in the shade. Remember, it was a hot day. They all raised their hands and, they looked around and they had this look of, oh, so we get strategy. We understand strategy. Strategy is when you realize that it's hot and there is shade and you park your car in the shade, which is not what's happening in this picture. Then I asked them a question, the second question. Who parked their car where the shade is going to be at 4 p.m. when we're done and you're going home? Not a single hand, but that was the moment they understood what strategy was. ladies and gentlemen, this will pass. We're not going to be wearing masks forever. We're not going to be virtual forever. Some of us may or may not. Start thinking about what happens next. During every meeting that you have, you're focused on the immediate, on the what needs to be solved right now. But start thinking about what's next, because this will be over and you need to know where the shade is going to be when this is over. As I said, I'm right there in the chat box and here to answer questions and give you answers to questions. And I enjoyed it. I hope you did as well. I'm going to provide handouts. There's a link here, very easy to remember, yoramsolomon.com/pass. And what I'm going to do, the reason this is a link and I'm not just sending you things, is because I'm going to put a bunch of things over there for you to pick up and download and do whatever you want to do. I want to remind you that the organizers want to get your feedback. There is a link to submit. Apparently in the left side of the navigation, there's a link to submit a session evaluation. Please submit session evaluation. This way the organizers would know if this is a session worth repeating or never, ever, ever bring me back.